In 1875, the House of Lords issued a ruling that exposed a 300-year-old legal contradiction, splitting one of Scotland's most powerful ancient bloodlines in two. The Erskine rise had nothing to do with bloody daggers or mountain warriors. Instead, they spent 4 centuries executing a calculated, white-collar hostile takeover against the Scottish crown. Mapping this medieval family's history onto the framework of a modern corporate monopoly exposes exactly how power was truly consolidated in early modern Scotland. They began in the 13th century as a modest regional operation. Operating along the arable banks of the River Clyde in Renfrewshire, they were local agricultural landlords, firmly removed from the isolated Highland Mountains. Instead of relying on military raids to expand their territory, they scaled their influence through administration. They provided essential, unglamorous bureaucratic service for the Scottish monarchy. Decades of extreme loyalty yielded the ultimate state contract. The Crown granted the Erskines physical custody of Stirling Castle, one of the most impenetrable and strategically vital fortresses in the kingdom. Inside those walls, they acted as literal bodyguards and wardens for highly vulnerable child monarchs. By protecting infant kings from rival factions, they made themselves indispensable fixers for the central government. By 1435, they had the political capital to launch a massive territorial acquisition. Their target was the Earldom of Mar, a spectacularly wealthy and sprawling province in the north. Merging physical control over the monarch with a legal claim to the north moved the Erskines from the ranks of government employees into the position of a monopolistic threat to the state. When the ruler of Mar died without an heir, the Erskines moved to absorb the territory, but the Scottish Crown, acting as a nervous market regulator, stepped in to block the merger. Sir Robert Erskine possessed the intellectual property to back his claim. Local juries verified his right to the earldom through direct female lineage, yet the Crown flatly refused the transfer. Allowing a powerful Lowland family to control that much northern market share was a risk the monarchy refused to take. This triggered a grueling 130-year legal standoff. While the government continually stalled and buried the claim in red tape, the Erskines quietly bided their time. They survived this century-long freeze by exploiting their unique administrative position. Because they still held the heavy iron keys to the royal nurseries and state fortresses, they retained massive political leverage. This century of legal gridlock proved that in medieval Scotland, airtight paperwork meant nothing without the physical leverage to enforce it. The deadlock finally broke in 1565. Facing intense political pressure, Mary, Queen of Scots, authorized the merger, formally granting the Erskines the contested Mar lands. This triggered their absolute peak of power. Shortly after securing the earldom, the head of the family assumed the regency, effectively taking over as the CEO of Scotland. But a century and a half later, the leadership made a fatal miscalculation. In 1715, the family's executive head went rogue, launching an armed Jacobite rebellion to overthrow the new Hanoverian king. The resulting market crash was instantaneous. The government retaliated by bankrupting them, liquidating their physical estates, and stripping their ancient titles. This animated chart illustrates the stark reality of the Erskine wealth timeline. After centuries of calculating asset accumulation peaking in the late 1500s, their total holdings instantly flatlined to zero following the 1716 attainder. 400 years of meticulous generational ascent evaporated because of a single disastrous executive gamble, forcing the survivors into a century of quiet exile. In the 1800s, the remaining family members began a massive, quiet restructuring effort, utilizing legal trusts to slowly buy back their core commercial properties around Alloa. But as soon as they recovered their wealth, they triggered a bizarre internal crisis. In 1866, the family leader died without children, causing the heir male and the heir general to sue each other over the rules of succession. The case escalated all the way to the House of Lords in 1875. The court reviewed the archives and ruled that the 1565 deal with Mary, Queen of Scots hadn't restored their ancient medieval title at all. It had merely created a completely new, lesser earldom. Stripped of their ancient legal prestige, the family needed a way to maintain authority and unite a landless global diaspora. They executed a massive cultural rebranding. They began assigning specific woven tartans and crest badges to their followers, artificially generating a shared visual identity for a corporate network that no longer held unified political power. The romantic Highland clan aesthetic we recognize today is a modern invention. It serves as a highly effective corporate identity, designed to paper over a deeply fractured Lowland legal history. The British government attempted a final patch with the 1885 Restitution Act. They legislated a compromise that split the earldom into two simultaneous, completely distinct titles held by two different people. This created a permanent glitch in British law. The exact terms of that 16th century backroom deal were never properly recorded, leaving the truth swallowed up by missing manuscripts and terrible record-keeping. With the paper trail dissolving into the 15th century, it is impossible to determine who definitively holds the original ancient genetic rights, which leaves a lingering question for anyone exploring their own ancestry. If you look closely enough at your own surname, what kind of hostile takeovers, buried lawsuits, or artificial branding might you find?